Well, today on the show, I'm joined by Don Watkins. Don joins me to talk about his book, Effective Egoism. This is one of many books that Don has written. There'll be links to him in the description, but he's the Vice President of Fundraising and Marketing at the Ayn Rand Institute. The book we're discussing today draws on a lot of work from Ayn Rand and her philosophical framework, which came to be known as Objectivism. The idea of this conversation is to help individuals begin to grapple with key principles and frameworks which should be utilized to live a meaningful life directed via values, through morality, goal-orientated towards actual happiness. It's something that's so easily lost in the 21st century. There's a cacophony of voices online, in our families and social situations, calling for our attention, swaying us left to right. So what I hope that this conversation does is introduce you to some of these key ideas and frameworks and help you build into the future in a way that's meaningful and of value. If it's your first time checking out the show, I'd ask you to hit the subscribe button. If you're on YouTube or Rumble, select the bell notification icon. That's going to remind you whenever we release a video on the channel. And if you wouldn't mind sharing this with your friends, your family, your followers, anyone who you think might find it interesting. We grow as a channel and platform because you, as our audience, take the time to share, comment, and push our videos online. So thank you so much for doing that. All right, enough of this. I'll let you enjoy the conversation now with Don Watkins on effective egoism. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show. My name's Samuel. Today I'm joined by Don Watkins. Don, it's great to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
So you've written a fascinating book, Effective Egoism, which I've gone through, made loads of notes, really enjoyed it. We're going to be diving into loads of facets and nuances of your book throughout this conversation. But I guess before we dive into all the details, it'd be good to get a bit of an overview about you and the reason why you wrote this book.
Sure. So I discovered Ayn Rand, the philosopher and novelist of Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, and other works when I was 15, and was really blown away by her view of the world and really came to see that it was true. And over the course of decades, I found that it was really a powerful tool for achieving happiness and really making a successful life for myself. But one of the things was it was really hard to learn and it was really hard to implement. And so this book is really a distillation of everything that I learned over the course of those 25 years that I think makes it much easier to learn and much easier to implement.
I like that. I like that a lot. I've read all of Ayn Rand's fictional work. Obviously, it's very philosophical all the same. But characters like Howard Rourke, I look at them and go, how could one possibly live to that sort of kind of level? He kind of seems like he's almost like formed out of iron at times. But I think your book does a great job of kind of dissecting loads of the different threads and nuances. I guess you've mentioned Ayn Rand already. We're going to be diving into her in a little bit more detail later on. But would you mind kind of giving the audience a little bit of an overview about Objectivism?
Sure. I mean, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but she summarized it as the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason is his only absolute. And I think that really captures the essence. It's a life of reason, creation, and as a result, moral nobility, or you could put it in more relatable terms, self-esteem. And that is the kind of core vision that's being painted. And the question is, like, how do you actually achieve that? And, I mentioned I distill that into my book, but maybe it would be helpful to give one example of, like, what are the kinds of challenges involved in it? So in the summary I mentioned, she puts productive achievement as man's noblest activity. Philosophy says you should build your life, or her philosophy anyway, says build your life around a productive career. But how do you choose a career? Like, that's a struggle that a lot of us face. And philosophy doesn't give you it says certain things about how to do that. It doesn't give you everything that you need in order to make that decision. And so one of the things that I think is really valuable is to have, like, the basic framework that philosophy gives us. And I think we'll get into, like, what is philosophy and why is it so valuable and important. And, but it doesn't give you all of the guidance that you need. And so part of what I wanted to give was that what are some tools or strategies for implementing this big picture guidance so that you can actually have a life that you love.
I love that. Yeah, it's almost like a philosophy built on reason, self-interest, and individualism. I guess for many people listening to this are going to be in the West, and I'd imagine almost 100% of people listening to this are going to be in the West, and they're going to kind of almost balk, I guess, at this idea of kind of self-interest and individualism, and these sort of words are kind of almost not archaic, but very heavily frowned upon. So I just want to kind of put a pin in that, because we're going to be coming to that later on in the episode to kind of unpack why that might be the case for a lot of people. Did you have like a specific like audience when you wrote this book? Were you thinking of people coming out of university or people starting on their careers, or like what was it you kind of, or is there a sort of certain age range this book's based for? Like, how did you kind of picture it in your mind as you were writing it?
I mean, I think it could be valuable to people at different stages of life and coming from different places in life. But when I wrote it, what I thought was, if I met a young Bill Gates and wanted to hand him a book to get him to rethink the issue of morality and really see the value of philosophy for happiness, what book would I give? And so the young Bill Gates is trying to capture a couple different factors. One is somebody who's intelligent, ambitious, but also not predisposed to be interested in philosophy. A little interested in ideas, but a little bit skeptical of philosophy itself. And so like that was the kind of person that I wanted to reach and say, like, there's a lot of cash value here if you're willing to look, and I'm going to try to prove to you that there's cash value here.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And you kind of mentioned as well that kind of, and it says it in your book that, philosophy allows us to critically examine our most basic assumptions. So I guess we kind of mentioned things like individualism and others. I guess, what would you say some of the key assumptions are that objectivism is going to force somebody to confront? Like, what is it like if we have a list or some of the kind of key ones that will be floating around? What would they be?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I think about philosophy is precisely that we go through life and we're making all kinds of assumptions. And what philosophy is doing is it's bringing those to the surface. So if you think about Socrates, right? What's notable about him is that he realizes that people are getting in all kinds of debates, for instance, about like, is this just or is that just? Is this pious or is that pious? And he says, like, you're assuming that you even know what you're talking about. Like, what is justice? And so it's bringing to the surface that you have a certain assumption about what this thing is that you're talking about. But if you, but you don't know what assumptions you're making. You don't know if they're true. And he twists people into pretzels as they realize, yeah, I don't actually have a consistent view of what justice is, or certainly one that I can defend. And so the basic assumptions that philosophy is bringing to the surface, the assumptions behind all of our other assumptions, are assumptions about the world, about how we know the world, about human nature, and about good and evil. And what philosophy does is it raises those issues into ones that we can think about critically, self-consciously, and therefore know that they're true, and therefore proactively and self-consciously use them to guide all of our thought and action thereafter. And so this is like the ultimate tool of self-control, because if you don't engage in philosophic thinking, if you don't think about what assumptions you're making about, how do I actually know that this is knowledge, or is this really good, and is this really evil? Then you're in the grips of assumptions, you're in the grips of ideas that you don't know what they are. You don't know if they're true or false. And as a result, in a deep way, you're out of control. And so the philosophy gives you this kind of superpower where it doesn't give you all of the answers to life, but it really empowers you to be better at pursuing the answers in every other endeavor that you're involved in.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think I'm going to have a bit of a spiel here about C.S. Lewis very briefly, and I want to throw it back to you, Don, because a lot of, I guess, theists, and I'm not a Christian or anything myself, but a lot of theists kind of look at people who aren't Christian or aren't religious and kind of turn around and say, okay, so you're applying to reason. We've mentioned reason many, many times so far. Lewis wrote a book called Miracles, and in that book he kind of has this idea essentially that if reason is a purely evolutionary process, then it's not necessarily come about into us to give us the correct view and judgment of something. Rather, it's come about for the survival of the fittest. It's come about to help us kind of propagate, essentially, not necessarily give us hard, cold truths. And Christians love to kind of bring this into the argument. When somebody appeals to reason, they'll turn around and say reason wasn't instantiated by a divinity of some sort. It isn't really reason. It's more of a sort of kind of, I guess, bastard child of reason, potentially. And actually what you're getting, something that's going to be near reason, but not quite. It's never going to quite get there. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this kind of very classic Christian pushback against reason, if that's okay.
It's a really stupid argument because... Yeah. Because how is it that reason enables us to survive? Well, it's precisely by enabling us to know reality. That is, that if what you're gaining isn't knowledge, then it's not going to help you navigate reality. And then you would have to ask the question of, like, you're assuming that evolution in that case is true. Well, how the hell did you ever figure that out if it wasn't through reason and its ability to know reality? It's, in the end, it's what Ayn Rand called the fallacy of the stolen concept, is where you're using later knowledge to undermine earlier knowledge in which it depends. You have to know that reason is valid and know something about how it works to even formulate a theory like evolution, nevertheless to say it's true. And so evolution can't then teach you, oh, I guess reason doesn't give us knowledge of reality, because it's undercutting its own basis. It's a rationalization, and it's any attack on reason is a rationalization. It's a rationalization to protect something that you want to believe on other grounds. You want to believe something that you can't prove, that reason won't allow you to believe. And so you want to liberate yourself from the so-called straitjacket of reason. And that's precisely what's going on with arguments like that.
That's beautiful. I mean, Lewis in the book Miracles uses the analogy of kind of somebody sitting on a branch and then sawing the branch off where they're sat and falling down. But it's within that kind of, I don't know, 2-minute spiel, you've kind of moved the person further on, which is fascinating, and kind of explained how the theist is essentially doing precisely the same thing, which I love. That was beautiful. Okay, let's push on. So you kind of argue that sacrifice is easy, but knowing what you want is difficult. And your book obviously kind of parallels effective altruism. Your book is Effective Egoism. So there's this idea of kind of sacrifice within effective altruism. So I'd like you to unpack the idea of kind of why you think that, and explain why sacrifice is not a virtue of objectivism. Like, how does that unfold, I guess, within the framework of objectivism?
The conventional way we're taught to think about morality is that on the one side, you can be concerned with your life, your success, your happiness, or you can be concerned with what's moral. And that those are two, at best, like a Venn diagram, right? Like they sometimes maybe overlap, but they are also distinct focuses. It's a different way of viewing the world. And indeed, I think that the conventional view of morality is really not even a Venn diagram, that ultimately what it is that what's moral is defined by the non-you. And therefore there's something noble about sacrificing what you personally value, what matters to you, what you care about, what gives you joy, for something else. And that something else can be God, it can be other people, it can be many different things, but in one way or another, there's something that you value, and what's good is giving it up. And so when I use the word sacrifice, I mean sacrificing something that you value for something that you don't. And so the question is, like, why is that supposed to, like, what's wrong with sacrifice? But the real question is, what's right about it? What could possibly be good about, there's something you care about, you work to achieve it, and then you give it up. Because what that amounts to is throwing your life away, throwing away the things that you care about, throwing away the things that you've achieved. And nobody has ever offered a compelling answer to why is that the good? Why should that be what I'm aiming at? Why should I work for something and then surrender it? And so in a way you can think of it as that what I'm saying with the concept of effective egoism is that there's never been grounds for offering that. And yet there's very clear grounds for why I should want to enjoy the things I achieve and that why I should work to achieve things. It's because that's what brings joy, fulfillment, and passion into my life.
Yeah, and you kind of talk about this idea in the book about never giving up a higher order value for a lower order value, which I thought was really, really helpful, especially when I was kind of thinking through things that I might need to do today or tomorrow or just big decisions in my life as well, to be fair. It works really nicely for the big and the small is kind of what's the end goal? Like what's this accomplishing? And actually, is it diminishing something that I view to be of higher value? And if so, it really makes me ask the question, like, why am I doing this thing? Like, is it for someone else? Am I kind of, giving up my time, my money, whatever it is, for something that is going to make me feel better or people say I should be doing? And you used a nice example actually about a kind of, it's not a nice example, it's quite a harsh example, but I think it's really helpful, which is this idea of a kind of a person, their parents are getting old, and almost like their parents are saying, your responsibility is to now come and look after us, almost demanding that person and asking them to sacrifice potentially higher order values that they might be trying to attain or work towards for a potential lower order value, which would be to go and serve their parents in whatever capacity. Now, it might very well be that that person's higher order value is to kind of go and look after their parents, like that's kind of up there at the top, in which case it's fine. But it's this idea that people expect things of us. So I think it'd be helpful, Don, just to kind of frame this idea of kind of what we're coming up against when we hit the idea of a personal value. What is a personal value?
Well, I mean, anytime you have a concept that you want to get clear on, you have to think as opposed to what. And in the end, I think all values, all genuine values are personal values. That is, to be a value is to be of value to someone. But what personal is stressing is that you'll often get, to take the religious example, people who will say, oh, well, I'm turning the other cheek because what I value is God and the afterlife. And what I'm arguing is, no, that's a rationalization. It's something that is not valuable to you for your life and happiness on this earth. And therefore, it doesn't fall into the realm of values. It's really trying to dress up something really ugly, which is just you're giving up a value. You're surrendering your well-being to an enemy, and to rationalize it in the sense that, well, it's for some other, greater value, which is the alleged happiness of a already perfect being who shouldn't be able to be impacted by anything in any case. That's no different than like the Marxists who say that you should sacrifice your happiness, your business, your property so that your great-grandchildren will live in a utopia. All values are personal. To be a value is you have to have a stake in it, and you don't have a stake in these values that are not personal values. And that's why what sacrifice is. So you talked about it in terms of higher order and lower order values. And there's something that's right about that. You can sacrifice something that you find more valuable for something you find less. But if you really want to understand altruism and sacrifice as an ethic, that's not even quite the right way to think about it. What it really is that you shouldn't be a valuer, that you should do your duty. It's really about surrendering your judgment about what's valuable to an authority who says, no, you have to serve some other end. So it's not even they're elevating things that are less valuable. It's that they're saying that your whole perspective, you shouldn't be focused on evaluating, is this what I want for my life? Is this good for my life? That kind of mental processing, which is what it really means to pursue happiness, that should all be shunted to the side because somebody said so. And the example you gave, this was people will often tell me, I often hear that the way that I and that Ayn Rand characterize our conventional morality. She called it altruism. That nobody really believes in that. Nobody says that you should give up the career that you want to go serve in a soup kitchen. Now, that's not true. You mentioned the effective altruists. They both preach and many of them practice. You know, that career that you love? Peter Singer, right? One of the guiding light of effective altruism, tells the story of he had this graduate student who loved philosophy, was great at philosophy, and then should be celebrated because he said, okay, I'm going to go, instead of a career in philosophy, I'm going to go work on Wall Street. I don't love finance. I don't like finance at all, but I'm going to be able to make more money and give it away to other people. So there is that kind of case, but the more common case, the way that this actually comes up in life is that we sacrifice our judgment about what we want our lives to be in order to pander to the demands of some authority. And so this is a young woman I was talking to who was like, she was in graduate school trying to build a career for herself, working in her spare time, taking extra classes in philosophy in her spare time. And it was her father saying, I'm sick and I'm going to be sick for a long time. And you have a duty, because you're my child, to come and tend to me. Like, you have to give up everything that you're working for because I say so. I want it. I demand it. And that's the other side of what's wrong with sacrifice. So it's not just throwing your life away. Ayn Rand has this great line in The Fountainhead, which amounts to, whenever there's somebody demanding that you sacrifice, there's somebody collecting sacrifices. And so one way to think about altruism is that it's a tool of control. It's what it's trying to get people to do is willingly serve and obey. And it's saying that to be a good person is to serve and obey. And so the people who preach altruism and sacrifice the most are those who want to control other people and gain their sacrifices.
Such an interesting way to look at it. I wonder if someone like, Sam Harris, spoken to Peter Singer a few times and others as well. And I wonder if he's ever kind of come across or thought about it in this way. Probably not. I mean, whenever he mentions Ayn Rand, it's always to kind of snub her, or to kind of snub the work that she's done. We can kind of get to that, kind of why that is the case shortly. So there's this idea then, I guess, we've touched on it many, many times now, kind of serving a cause greater than yourself. And this is what the sort of altruistic gods are kind of demanding your sacrifice, and then somebody's going to be collecting that sacrifice. I really like that you said that. There's this idea in your book of creating a self that is worthy and capable of happiness. And I kind of feel like the idea of being worthy and capable of happiness is a kind of a net negative when you look at the sort of society and the situations that we live in today, because we do live in a very sort of I guess effective altruist-esque society. Like, we're always being told to give. Like, there's a website called Giving What You Can, where you have to kind of pledge 10% of your entire worth to giving to charities that are doing the most good, etc., etc. Like, we're kind of bombarded by this idea of kind of giving. Could be other ways as well with our time, etc. But this idea of kind of creating a self, like somebody having to do the work to create a self that is worthy and capable of happiness, I find to be a fascinating idea, because I see it all the time. I've got many friends who are depressed. I've gone through depression. There's loads of people that don't feel like they're capable or worthy of creating a life where they're able to actually be happy and flourish. So would you mind kind of touching on that kind of idea for us?
Well, you raised it in contrast to, the effective altruist idea of, giving money away to charity. And part of why I think egoism gets dismissed is the caricatures that we walk around going, I'm not giving to charity. But the whole perspective is that is so not the issue. It's so not what life is about. Like, if you want to give some money to charity, by all means, like I do on occasion too. But the essence of life has nothing to do with that. The essence of life is figuring out what kind of life you want to build and building it, and then being able to enjoy it because you're thinking, yeah, I deserve what I've achieved. And so this idea of building a self and a life that you love, that if you look at so many of the challenges that people face, if you want to make something of your life, you have to take on daunting, ambitious goals that require you to expose your weak points and overcome them, to take on risk, to learn new skills that you don't even know if you're capable of learning them for sure, to step into new ventures. I mean, I remember I worked for somebody and he said, "Hey, I need you to take up sales for, part of the business." And like, to me, the idea of calling somebody up that I didn't know and then saying, "Here, buy from me, pay me money," that was terrifying. And in fact, I remember I tried calling my first sales call. I called them. I was, after procrastinating for as long as I possibly could, left a message, so thankful that they didn't pick up the phone. And a little bit later, I get a call, and I wasn't really paying attention. I was thinking I was making lunch, and they said, "Hey, this is so-and-so from Business XYZ." And I was so, like, my anxiety just spiked through the roof that I just hung up, like we got disconnected, and had to kind of work myself back up. Like, that's the kind of hard work in pursuing goals. And then to think that you're worthy. How many people, if you've known anybody, if you've lived long enough to actually get some life experience, there's a lot of people who they can't enjoy the things they have because, am I really worthy of this relationship? Are they too good for me? Am I an imposter in this job? Oh my God, people are going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. And it's really paralyzing and deprives people of a lot of deserved joy. That's the work of living. It's building the kind of character so that you have certainty that I can achieve my goals that I set out to achieve. And if I achieve them, then I earned it and I'm proud of it, rather than I'm existing in a state of self-doubt. Like, and that's why I say charity's so not the issue. That is an all-encompassing and really inspiring journey that I think is at the core of what life's about. And that's what a proper ethic should focus on. It should focus on how do you engage in that quest to build the kind of character and achieve the grand scale goals that make life worth living. And any morality that says that the focus is on what we do about somebody else's poverty is just insane and moving you away from the real challenge and the real cash value of life.
If you want more ways to engage with the show, join our locals community. Membership is free and gives you access to all my updates, the reading plan, and early access to all audio-only versions of each episode. Supporters can ask guest questions, comment on posts, and get early access to all video versions of each episode. Your support is essential for the show's growth. The best way to support the show is through our locals community. You can also contribute via YouTube Super Thanks, PayPal, Substack, and even Bitcoin. All links are in the description, and thank you for helping us to continue to create content. Yeah, and I hope the sort of watchers and listeners are kind of getting this idea that we're kind of shifting our concept of ethics and morality here, not in a massive way, but kind of away from other substances, other things, to a kind of a way of actually imbuing yourself with the tools and the abilities and the directional power to begin to build out a life that you're going to feel like you're worthy of, that you're going to feel like you're capable of, and that could ultimately lead to happiness. I mean, if you set the wrong goal, right, you're going to struggle potentially, but kind of, I guess that's where your book comes in. It does a really good job of helping people to lay that out. I want to stick on worthiness briefly. I didn't kind of prep for this question. I didn't prep you for this question, Don, so apologies. But I want to talk about Christianity because, people talk about worthiness. I mean, I went to church for many, many, many years before I lost my faith. And the idea is kind of, I guess, kind of you're worthy because, Christ has died for you and said you're worthy. So it's almost like you kind of put on a badge that says worthy, or you put on a mask that kind of makes God see you as Christ, essentially. So you're kind of hiding, I guess, almost behind this sort of unearned worthiness. And then I don't think that really allows people to prepare and be able to live within the actual kind of real world. It kind of does many, many negative things actually to hamper them and hold them back from actually being able to live into their fullest potential. So would you mind kind of just touching on kind of, I guess organized religion or just religion in general, and the sort of ways that it kind of corrupts or holds people back? And feel free to bring in objectivism as the counter to that if this is the right time.
Well, I mean, you put it as that you're worthy because, you know, you're made in the image of Christ or something like that, right? And so, yeah, there is that message, but there's the other message that you aren't worthy because you aren't like Christ. You're sinful, you're prideful. Indeed, the whole quest to feel worthy is the sin of pride. And so there's a real anti-pride message. And notice in that formulation, everything good from you comes from non-you. Everything bad comes from you. And so it's really a doctrine designed to make you feel unworthy and to tell you that you can never become worthy. And it's one of the great evils of Christianity. Ayn Rand rejected God and religion. I think she was 12. And there were two reasons. One was a more intellectual, or not intellectual. One was a more like logical based. There's just no evidence for it. But the other one is she resented enormously the idea that the moral ideal was going to be defined as something that human beings can never reach. She thought that was a real slap in the face, and that people should accept that on faith. She thought it was a real travesty and a real you're surrendering self-esteem before you ever have the chance to gain it, because the only way to gain self-esteem, and that which is precisely the idea that I'm capable and worthy of living, is by living up to a moral ideal. And so to define a moral ideal that's inherently at odds, that you can't live up to, she thought was real monstrous, and monstrous precisely that it was an attack on the self-esteem that is at the real foundation and core of happiness.
That's really interesting. And so many people will associate self-interest with greed or exploitation. I think they'll only think of like, Wall Street and the sort of, Google or Alphatech and Apple and these sort of kind of industries that are, maybe pushing things out to China, sweatshops creating stuff because they want to kind of, fill their pockets. That's their self-interest, I guess you could say. So I think it'd be helpful just to kind of understand how objectivism defines rational egoism from these sort of negative perceptions that people might just want to label it straight away with.
So there can be we've been hinting at like the way that people will kind of dismiss Ayn Rand. And I think one of the reasons that happens is they think that they know what her views are because they know a couple words that she uses, right? But Ayn Rand's not looking at self-interest as we commonly think about it and saying that's good. What she's saying is that people have no idea what self-interest actually means. Because if you take it seriously, you have to think, the first question is, well, what is in a person's interest? What is actually good and genuinely good for a person? And now it can't be that the good is whatever you happen to desire, right? Like nobody would think about that in the realm of health. Like if I come out with like Don's Guide to Diet and Exercise, and my formula for success is like drink a 6-pack, eat a pizza every day, and sit on the couch, you wouldn't say, well, I mean, your path to health is as good as mine. There's a sense that there's objective requirements, even if they're hard to identify, even if there's disagreement about some of the more concrete particulars, there's an objective phenomenon here that we can work to understand and think about, and that requires a kind of thoughtful, rational, long-range discipline action towards. And so what you have to think about is, if you were actually concerned with your interest and with thriving and with living the fullest, most passionate life possible, would that really consist of doing whatever you feel like, acting short range, harming, manipulating others? And one way to think about like that is not at all what your interests actually consist of, is if you think about parents, because I think parents tend to be, they want their kids to be happy and successful. And you do not see parents saying, well, look, what you need to do is you need to manipulate people. You need to screw people over. You need to do whatever you feel like doing in a moment. No, there's a view of that you can actually kind of build a life by pursuing demanding goals, by gaining knowledge, getting education, assuming that actually existed in the culture, by building a certain kind of character with certain kind of virtues. And I think there's a lot of confusion over kind of what those virtues are. It's not that parents have all the answers of what actually is in a self-interest, but there's a general view that it's like being productive, gaining knowledge, and having some sort of moral character are really vital pieces of the puzzle. And that should tell you at least that there's something really perverse with this idea that kind of our image of what a genuinely self-interested person would look like has anything to do with this caricature in the culture. So what Rand is really doing when she's talking about self-interest is saying, I'm going to present a completely new vision of self-interest. That if you really take seriously your interests, you're going to be rational. That is, your guiding principle and virtue of life is going to be living a life of reason. That is our means of survival. It's our means of knowledge. It's the way that we gain knowledge and values. You're going to live the life of producer. Human beings live by using their minds to create values, to build careers that enable them to achieve all of their other goals and have a strong sense of purpose and meaning in their life. And that you're going to deal with other people as thinker producers as well. That is, you deal with them not by exploitation and plunder. That you deal with them if the values that they are capable of achieving are the product of their reason and productiveness, then you're going to deal with them through trade. That is, through exchanging value for value, engaging in mutually beneficial, mutually fulfilling relationships with other people. And that's kind of in capsule form the vision of what she thinks genuine self-interest is. And certainly in my experience, is what genuine self-interest is.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have time to go into it, but I just want to put a flag here for the listener, viewer. Like, if this is kind of hitting home for you, I'd really recommend you to do some research or just go online and watch some videos on the difference between Keynesian economics and Austrian economics, because the stuff we're talking about right now is absolutely fascinating, and I completely agree with it. And it really kind of feeds in and fits nicely in with the sort of kind of Austrian school of economics, which is so alien to the current Western dynamic or paradigm. It's fascinating. And I guess just to kind of push forwards into this self-interest just a little bit more, like if you have the right goals as a self-interested individual and you're propagating your life forwards and you're using rationality as the tool to be able to kind of begin to understand, navigate, and work through the sort of landscape in front of you to get to the sort of goals that you're building your life towards, whether that be a family or a happy marriage or whatever it is. There's this idea of forgiveness that kind of Christianity says it doesn't really matter what you do because you can be forgiven. Now, I'm aware that some Christians go, well, that's not true, but really when you kind of get down to the bottom of it, you kind of see that it is possible to do anything and to ask for forgiveness and that to be taken away because the redemptive force of Christ is all powerful theoretically. But there's the idea again in forgiveness within this sort of effective egoism framework, which says that forgiveness has to be worked for. It can't just be given. And there might even be things, Don, I don't know what you think of this, you kind of touched on it in your book, which aren't forgivable potentially. Like within this life, there are just some acts that are just so heinous that we won't be able to build up enough, I guess, money in the bank to ever pay back the money that you stole. I don't know what you think to that.
I mean, the evil of unearned forgiveness is that you're empowering what's bad. You're empowering bad. Like, who gains with unearned forgiveness? It's not the good people. It's precisely the bad. And so one of the central virtues of effective egoism is the virtue of justice. And what justice is it's judging people rationally and treating them as they deserve according to those judgments. And in that context, one of the things that's really crucial to know about people, including yourself, is that people are capable of making bad choices and then changing, or making good choices and changing for that matter. And that in judging them, therefore, we have to be open to the idea of, look, this person made compensation and restitution for a bad choice, and like they've learned a lesson and they've become better. And part of justice then is, you can call it forgiveness, but it's saying, yeah, like that debt is paid, my overall evaluation is that this person's on a trajectory of getting better, and therefore, like, I'm happy to deal with them, or at least deal with them in different domains. And so what the real issue is not so much for forgiveness, but it's justice. It's that how do you judge others and yourself with respect to immoral choices that you may have made, or even areas in your character that are requiring continual work. And and at the big picture, what you're focused on is, are they getting better or are they getting worse? And the idea with that there's certain things that aren't redeemable. There's two issues here, or two related issues. That if somebody does something immoral, one of the ways what it means to take morality seriously is that you make compensation or restitution when you can, and that you demonstrate to others over a period of time that you've really changed. And there are certain immoralities that you can't actually make restitution for, and that they're so bad or so long lasting that even if you have actually changed, it would never be objective to others. You would never have enough time to really prove that you've changed genuinely. Now that is exceptional. I think that, you're dealing with not only things like, murder or serious crimes. I mean, a person who's like self-consciously lying and deceiving a spouse over a period of years, I think can go in that category. There's not really restitution for that, and you could never really trust such a person again. It's hard to imagine circumstances where you could, but these aren't run-of-the-mill, challenges that most people deal with. I think for most of us, we can, kind of really build a character regardless of whatever challenges, we have or where we're starting from. And certainly that's true, the younger that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we have that self-interest directed in the right way, in the positive way that we're framing it, rather than these negative connotations that get slammed onto it so easily, it's less possible to go too far awry. It's much, obviously we're all going to get things wrong, right? We're all going to make mistakes and have to kind of, work towards improvement and showing that we've improved. But I feel like the sort of, I don't know, maybe it's a sort of kind of exponential curve. Like if you are directed along the right path, it's going to be very, very hard to suddenly, go far left or far right. You're going to be going in a certain direction, erroring as we go and correcting rather than going too far right. But who knows?
No, there's something really right about that. So, I mean, my view of immorality, it's essentially jettisoning rationality. So you said we all make mistakes, but it's really important to make a distinction between mistakes of knowledge and breaches of morality. That for something to be a moral breach, it's not a mistake. It's not, like I thought, take the difference between killing somebody in self-defense and manslaughter, right? Like one of those is good, one of those is bad, and a person could be mistaken. There's really tragic cases of, I thought that this person was attacking me and they really weren't. That's an error of knowledge. It's a very costly, catastrophic error of knowledge, but it's not a breach of morality. A breach of morality is the person engaged in manslaughter. And so you have to keep those two things clear in mind. And then I forget how we got on it. What was the trajectory. And the point is that when a person jettisons reason, when they, decide that when they're not as thoughtful, when they act kind of thoughtlessly out of focus on emotion, a person who's predominantly rational, it's not like if they just get kind of lazy one moment, they're going to start like shooting heroin and going on a murder rampage. Like what happens is that you slowly over time can move in worse and worse directions the more that you're characteristically out of focus and evading reality and jettisoning reason. And so the trajectories keep us within bounds, but the more that we're rational and thoughtful, the kind of better our default, worst case will be. And then the inverse of that is true.
Yeah, I really like that. You kind of, I mean, you could always imagine that kind of, we're in a jet plane and we're going along, and rationality is the fuel that is keeping us in the air. And if we kick that fuel out, like there's only one way the plane's going to go, and that's not going to be in the direction we want to travel. That's going to be down onto the ground, potentially catastrophically. So I really like that analogy. That's fascinating. You kind of mentioned Sam Harris quite a few times in your book. It's clear that you've kind of engaged with quite a lot of his work on meditation and free will and lying and those sorts of things. I mean, I followed him for a long time. I still do, actually, but I was really kind of very close to his work when I was leaving Christianity 8-9 years ago now, and I find him more and more of an interesting character as the years go on, and I kind of seem to be shifting further and further from him. But I've heard him on a few times talk about Ayn Rand and her kind of proponents, and talk about them with their copies of Atlas Shrugged under their arms, walking around telling everybody that they know best. Like he's a clear critic and kind of dismisses Rand as a polemicist, I guess, rather than an actual serious philosopher, you could say. And whenever I talk to philosophers, talk to many philosophers on this show, and I mention Ayn Rand, they always poo-poo her work and almost act as if she's not even worthy to be on the scene as a philosopher. I'm aware this is a really big question, so we can take it in any direction you want, but kind of what is the main misunderstanding that these people seem to have about Rand and her work? Like, what is it they're missing, they're completely oblivious to?
Well, first of all, I don't think most of them have read or engaged with her work, or if they've read it, it's not actually trying to grapple with it. And, I would say for some of those who haven't, I'm a little sympathetic, not totally. I'm a little sympathetic because I do think there is a phenomenon of you're a university philosopher, and what you encounter, let's say, is the freshman student who just read Ayn Rand and thinks that it means now I can be a jerk. And it certainly doesn't mean that, but you're judging an author by their products. And I think that's not fair. They wouldn't do that to other thinkers. But nevertheless, you can give a little bit of license. I think the best, how would you put it? The most understandable reason why they're dismissive is that Ayn Rand is not doing contemporary academic philosophy. And their view is that's because she's not a real philosopher, and her view is because what they're doing isn't philosophy. And it often happens in the history of philosophy that you get a kind of turning point from the mainstream, and it becomes a disagreement not over like, oh, your conclusions are different from mine, but it's what you're doing is not even philosophy. And so like this happened when Descartes breaks with the scholastics. It wasn't a view of, oh, Descartes has some different conclusions with us. It was Descartes saying everything you're doing is wrong. Your whole approach is wrong. And them looking at him and saying, no, your whole approach is wrong. And so there's a similar thing that an academic philosopher could have in encountering Ayn Rand. But her view is that philosophy is about giving, it's about a system. It's about building an integrated, consistent framework for viewing the world. And that is not at all how academic philosophy functions today and in her time as well. And so there's a whole disagreement even what the subject of philosophy is. And if you actually read the history of philosophy, though, if you read the major philosophers in history, like there is no question that she is doing what they are doing and that she's carving out unique and thoughtful views on the major issues in the history of philosophy. And so anybody who's really seriously interested in philosophy as a subject, like there's no actual excuse in the end for dismissing her as like not a real philosopher or something. You might disagree with her conclusions, and I have no problem with that. Like that's a debate to have, but you can't dismiss her as not being a serious philosopher. And in the end, I think the reason for the most part that she's dismissed is not for those understandable reasons. It's because they don't like her conclusions. It's that they are tied to ideas either pro-faith, pro-sacrifice, anti-capitalism, and she holds the exact opposite. And so, like, the easiest way to dismiss her is say, like, she's not even worthy of consideration, and then you don't have to bother with the actual arguments.
Yeah, such a shame. But yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I guess just to kind of talk about Ayn Rand and her work. So I've actually never read any of her philosophical essays. I've read people that have written about her philosophical work, but I've read all of her fictional work. So I actually kind of worked through reverse order. Started with Atlas Shrugged, then did The Fountainhead, then Anthem, and then We the Living. I found that a really interesting way to do it, actually, kind of getting back to her sort of first published book at the very end. Seeing threads in her earlier work that are obviously massively kind of poured on and utilised fascinatingly, especially within Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. Do you think that somebody should go away and engage with Rand through her philosophical work to start with, or would you recommend people picking up fiction?
I mean, I think there's a certain optionality to it. I think in general, the default is to start with the fiction. And, part of the reason why is just I started with the nonfiction, and by the time I went to the fiction, I had the plot spoiled for me. And it's a travesty because they're first and foremost just great stories, and the kind of mysteries, particularly Atlas Shrugged, which is in many ways a mystery novel, to have them spoiled, it robs them a little bit of the magic. I mean, they're still my favorite novels, but I can only think of what it would have been like to read them without knowing the core of what was going to happen. But I think there's also a more just a pure intellectual reason why starting with the novels is crucial. And this is something that she talks about in her nonfiction. So one of the subjects or branches of philosophy has to do with art. And she has a whole view of art. And part of her view is that what art's function is to bring our most abstract concepts, our philosophic concepts, down to perceptual reality so that we can contemplate them as concrete things. So if you think about like abstractions about the good, like that is so abstract. Like, what does it mean to be good? That you can describe it in a lot of words, but you don't really know a person's conception of the good until it's put into a work of art. And so to even get what Ayn Rand is talking about in her nonfiction, I think in the end, you can't really understand it without the fiction. Now you need the nonfiction too. That is, for philosophy, you need both. You need an artistic depiction that allows you to hold in your mind, what does this look like when practiced in reality over the course of a lifetime? And you need the articulation of it so that you can hold those principles and apply them conceptually, abstractly. But for those reasons, I would start with the novels unless, if you just don't read fiction, start with the nonfiction. And if it grabs you, eventually you can work your ways to the novels.
If you're looking for more ways to enjoy our content, check out the YouTube channel for full-length videos or explore our Rumble channel for an alternative video platform. You can also listen to the podcast in your favourite feed, and while you're there, please leave a positive and written review. It helps others to find the show. Lastly, you can read all my essays over on Substack, and by signing up, each new instalment will be delivered straight to your inbox. All links are in the description, and thank you for following along. Yeah, I mean, Atlas Shrugged, I didn't know what was going on when I first started the book, so I'd no spoilers. I got given it by some really close friends. They'd read it, absolutely loved it. They were from Poland, or are from Poland, left socialism, came to the UK, and gave me the book. Said, "Sam, you've just got to read this book." So I read it, and I was like, "What's going on?" And then when it got to Galt's speech, and I won't spoil anything that he says, but for those 60 to 90 pages, I forget how long it is precisely, like, I just couldn't put it down. I was like, this is just one of the best things I've ever read, genuinely. So I would encourage folks to go away and check out her work for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting. We've kind of mentioned a few times kind of capitalism, an idea that Yaron Brooks speaks about quite a lot as well. I think he's coming over to the UK in a few weeks' time in May to do a talk on it, actually, which I'm going to hopefully try and attend. But when Rand comes to something like capitalism, she's not coming to it from an economic lens, which is quite often the sort of way that we kind of approach capitalism and we talk about it within universities and stuff. But she's approaching capitalism and many other things through the moral lens, which is what we've spoken about. And would you say it's fair to suggest that she approaches everything through this sort of moral lens of objectivism, or does she ever come at anything outside of it? It feels like it's all encompassing. Not that that's a bad thing, but it seems to take everything into itself.
Well, I mean, her view was that philosophy shapes all of our thought and action, whether we know it or not. And so what she was interested in was bringing philosophy self-consciously to every issue. And if you think about something like capitalism, you're dealing with a social system. You're dealing with political, social organization. It's asking the question of how should we live together? But that is a moral question. So if you take something like economics, economics can tell you like what kind of system is likely to produce wealth and what kind of policies will be pro-production or anti-production. But judging a social system, it really depends on what you're trying to practice. If your goal is service to God, if you think that what we should be living for is the world beyond, if your vision of the good is equality in the egalitarian sense of equal outcomes, if your goal is untouched nature, then capitalism is bad. It does not promote those things. It does not. It doesn't lead to sacrifice for the German vote. It does not lead to the dictatorship of the proletariat. So like depending on your moral goal, you're going to have a different view of capitalism. And so what she's acknowledging is you can't escape a moral evaluation of a social system by talking about economics. What's practical depends on what you want to practice. And most people throughout history have had some collectivist goal, some goal that is beyond and above the individual's happiness. But capitalism's whole way of functioning and the goal that justifies it, the goal at which it aims, is each individual's right to exist for his own sake. And so you can't get away from morally grappling with the social system. Now, economics is really crucial for many, many reasons, including a full understanding and justification of a social system. Because there is this question of like, if my moral goal is the flourishing of individuals and their pursuit of happiness, then like a crucial part of that is their material flourishing and material prosperity. And so you need an economic analysis, but it's only meaningful and it's only relevant within a moral context that has been established. And what often happens is when people try to talk about economics and economic analyses of social systems without explicit reference to morality, is that they smuggle in a whole bunch of moral premises that they don't acknowledge. And inevitably, these are anti-individualist and therefore anti-capitalist moral conceptions. And she thought the whole pro-capitalist movement, the whole history of the movement, had been really sabotaged by the fact that they had adopted an anti-capitalist morality. They had adopted and brought in principles that say that man is a selfless servant, not to be sacrificed for the group or to God or something else. And that is precisely why capitalism came under attack and remains under attack to this day.
Fascinating, it really is. We've mentioned many things that were negative or are negative that Ayn Rand's kind of thought about and utilized and kind of explored within her philosophical framework. It'd be interesting to kind of also hear about other intellectual influences that came to her that are positive. Like, are there key figures or artists or different areas potentially, whether it be, we've talked about economics, but we could look at kind of philosophy or literature even, where she was influenced in a positive way to kind of actually know I need to go and espouse these ideas through both fiction and non-fiction.
I mean, she had plenty of smaller influences, but I mean, she really identified, you can think of it as the big three, and that was in philosophy, Aristotle, in literature, Victor Hugo, and in politics, the founding fathers. And those were really the only three kind of figures that she acknowledged a deep debt to. Though she had a lot of other influences, but those were the ones with I think the biggest contribution to her thought, and that she was always, expressed deep gratitude for their work.
I want to dive into your book now. We've kind of touched on loads of the sort of surrounding subjects. Apologies, we've not actually dived into it fully yet. What I hope to do with this conversation is to kind of give people a brief overview, I guess, of both Ayn Rand, Objectivism, but also the kind of ways that your book distills this stuff down so that people can actually begin to practically outwork it. I think that's a really key bit that's missing very often from this conversation. In your book, you say, quote, "Happiness is a life of unadulterated joy in existence," end quote. So how does Objectivism define happiness, and how is it different from conventional ideas of happiness?
I mean, conventional ideas about happiness, in many respects, the word has kind of been emptied of meaning. But I think typically it connotates a kind of like, yeah, things are cool. Yeah, things are good. Like, it and often gets associated with really superficial representations of happiness. It's Tony Robbins, or the self-help guy up on a stage saying, "Oh, I'm awesome, life's great." It's the life of the party figure who's joking with like 3 martinis in his hand. And it's the Instagram influencer who is hashtagging their trip to the beach. And that is so not how I think about happiness. That happiness is deep, and often it can be very quiet. That is, some of the happiest people I know are very serious, definitely not the life of the party types, but they have a profound joy about the life that they're living, and a profound joy in the living of that life. And I would say that, so like at a philosophic level, the way I define it is that happiness, it's the achievement of a whole code of values. And Ayn Rand characterized it sometimes as a non-contradictory joy. And if you think about what she means by non-contradictory, the opposite of happiness is precisely feeling in conflict between yourself. Oh, I really want to do this, but I also want to do that. Or I don't want to do this, but part of me wants to do that. Or it's a conflict between you and reality. It's, I want this and I don't have it, and I don't know how to get it. So the non-contradictory joy is that my values all fit together into an overall life where they can be achieved and work together in kind of a positive way, rather than being at conflict. And so like that kind of gives a high level perspective. But what I was underlining with the first part is that the values involved include kind of, it includes trivialities, right? Like, it helps to have a comfortable place to live, and a nice car to drive, and clothes that make you feel confident. I don't want to belittle that. But it's about much more. I mean, the fundamental values that I focus on in Effective Egoism are reason, purpose, self-esteem, human relationships, and art. That those are the kind of most fundamental, most crucial values that I think make up a life worth living. And those are very deep, very powerful, and very grand.
Yeah, and it's so different from the way that I guess most people think about their lives now and attaining happiness. For most people that I speak to, happiness is usually kind of brought about through some form of escapism, whether that be, going to the cinema or Netflix, or getting absolutely trashed at the weekend with your friends, going out clubbing, whatever it is there's a, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with going out with your friends, with drinking, with going to the cinema or anything like that, but actually you kind of begin to see that it's not just on a Friday night that you're going drinking, it becomes a Wednesday and a Friday and a Saturday, and you begin to see kind of patterns build up as well, whether it be binging Netflix seasons or whatever it is, where there's this escapism, and your sort of happy place becomes not within the real world. It's almost harder to be happy in the real world. Happiness is always sought in some other ethereal thing that you keep needing to get your hit with. And I feel like, this book that you've written, Effective Egoism, Ayn Rand's work, they begin to really challenge the assumption, not that escapism's bad, but actually that it is possible to have an unadulterated joy in existence, that happiness is possible for the individual, even though, for many people it feels like, the world's a grey, dark place. It's hard to find that positivity. I know, any more thoughts on that space, Don?
Well, another way to put it is it's about how to build a life that you don't want to escape from. And as you said, like, binging Netflix or having a drink with your friends, like all of those can be really nice components of a life you don't want to escape from, or they can be used as an escape, in the same way that like Vicodin can be used to wipe out your mind and ignore the problems in your life, or can it be used to cope with a real problem, which is like my arm's broken, and this is a positive tool. So, but the question is it part of an overarching life that I'm all in on, like that I wake up and I'm excited to face the day and I like the trajectory of my life? That is really hard to achieve. And it takes a lot of thought and a lot of work, but it's possible. Like it really is. And what Effective Egoism is trying to do is give not the full totality of what's involved in doing it, but the kind of big picture guidance that we get from philosophy, and then something about how to implement that guidance. Because if happiness really is having a life where all the values, all the things that you're after fit together, the only way that you can figure out what's genuinely good to you and what things actually can fit together is through philosophy. That's what philosophy is grappling with, is what is the kind of overall architecture of a human life, of the human way of life. And then what you get to do as an individual is build your own life. It's that you get to decide, what kind of career do I want? What kind of relationships with what individual specific people do I want? Where do I want to live? What adventures do I go on? What do I want to learn about? Like all of that is yours to build, but you get to build it within a framework that actually coheres into something that's self-sustaining and rewarding.
Yeah, we can become our own Howard Rorks, which is fascinating. You mention as well in your book that morality should be like a travel guide, showing people how to live well rather than dictating arbitrary rules, and I loved that. For those listening, this might be their first time kind of hearing about lots of this sort of stuff. Like, what are some of the practical steps that somebody might be able to take to begin to start building a meaningful life? Like, what's A to C, for instance? Let's forget Z for now. Like, what are the first few steps somebody could begin to embark with?
Well, you indicated some, like the first is get rid of the view that morality is a rule book, right? Like, because that's what we get from religion, right? Morality is essentially a series of don'ts, and they're all very concrete, right? Like it's don't eat this kind of meat on this day, don't have this kind of sex with that kind of person. And like, why? Like, and what does it add up to? And what about the positive things I'm trying to achieve? Like, it has no guidance to offer. So step one is get rid of that. Step two is form a conception of the big picture values and virtues that make up a life that can that is capable of happiness. And then three is that you have to live that kind of life by choosing and pursuing the specific values that are going to make up your life. And I would say here, this gives me an opportunity to, my friend and colleague Tal Safani just came out with his own book, Secrets of a Passionate Life. And Tal really specializes in kind of breaking down, in a very tactical step-by-step way, like how to answer some of the questions about like, who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get there? And so that's kind of some specific steps. But another way to think about it is simply that you want, what I often let's take career, which is a lot of where I do a lot of work kind of coaching people. I teach a class with Tal called Philosophy, Work, and Business, where we help people select careers. And one of the first things that we tell them, because these are often younger people in their early 20s, the first thing you should just go out and do is like work, get experience, not so you can fill a resume, though that doesn't hurt, but just so you can start to think about, what do I like to do and what do I not like to do? Because to form values is a process of acting and reflecting on your action. And so you can't know thyself apart from that kind of action. So it's going out there and trying things in life. And one of the really bad consequences of the way we're taught to think about morality is that it's mostly about avoiding bad decisions. And so like the safest choice is always to say no to things because, I'll never make a mistake. Like nobody can blame me if I don't do something. But life's not about avoiding blame. It's about going out there and tasting, sampling life and learning from it and deciding, what do I really want? So like, for instance, the idea that like, what I should do is just, not sleep with anybody until I get married is like insane. Like, how are you going to even decide what kind of relationship that you want to endure over a long run without having relationships with different people, including different sexual experiences with people and so on. So the starting point is like going out there and tasting life, but then always reflecting on it and reflecting on it philosophically, which means thinking about the big picture virtues and values that you want to build into your character and translating those into the kind of specific projects, goals, actions, relationships they're going to make up your unique life.
Yeah, I really like that, and it's kind of saying no to short-termism. It's not saying that there aren't things that you can do which are going to be short in their duration, like go work through a drive-through for 6 months, just see what that's like, having to take orders and fill orders and kind of get from A to B over and over and over again. That's a fascinating experience, right? It's a short-term job for a really, really crucial experience. But actually kind of, and you say it in your book as well, like, we don't choose between isolated actions, but between kinds of lives. And I found that to be so helpful because there's almost like this accumulation effect that we all go through within our careers and within relationships that we have or whatever, is that every single thing that we're doing within that space is building into it. And sure, some things kind of ripple into other areas as well, like me doing this podcast and thinking is massively helping me with my work, with talking to customers and being confident and those sorts of things. So there's this sort of kind of accumulation effect through where the different actions we take are going to be pushing us towards, route B or route A. And it's all about kind of which one we want to go down. Like, where are our values driving us to? Where is happiness going to be found for us as individuals? And I found it to be just really, really helpful. I'll just say it again. We don't choose between isolated actions, but between different kinds of lives. And I think that's true for everything, Donna. Am I mistaken in saying that?
No. And it's part of why, to go back to a point I was making earlier about why you need philosophy and art. Part of what art allows you to do is project different kind of lives that you might live, and decide like which ones are better or worse, which characteristics make up the heroes that I admire, and which kinds of characteristics or vices make up the people that I disdain and don't want anything to do with. I was talking to an 11-year-old daughter, and she had watched some episodes of the show South Park, and like she was reflecting on the way in which like Cartman doesn't, like, he blames everybody else for everything. He never takes responsibility, and this stood in her mind as like, I don't want to be like Cartman. And so she's projecting like a kind of Cartman way of life and saying like, to hell with that. And that's what it means to be thinking in terms of kinds of lives that you can live, and choosing in terms of a life. And that way, when she faces a particular choice of, I really dropped the ball, hopefully, like she'll be thinking in terms, she's 11. So, it's still building that long range perspective on life. But what you're ultimately doing as you become more and more, as you grow, is you start projecting in terms of how your choices affect your overall lifetime. And it's not about sacrificing the short term in favor of the long term. It's really about trying to integrate them. It's about how much pleasure can I soak up out of today that is consistent with a long-term trajectory that leads me to where I want to go.
A lot of the things we've been speaking about as well is this idea of kind of something being an ends for either oneself or an ends for someone else's kind of goals or desires or purposes. And I guess kind of there are a few questions I want to kind of close this with, just to kind of help people really understand how this all fits together, I guess, is the idea of kind of relationships, I guess, and this idea of relationships fitting into an egoist moral framework. And we've already kind of touched on many of the answers that you're going to probably give for this, but it'd be good to really pull it together. So the idea of love, for instance, or friendship or community, these obviously can be reconciled with self-interest, but for many people, especially in the West, living under kind of like classic Christendom, I guess, still to the day, these things seem to be kind of like a sort of egoist mentality seems to conflict with the idea of kind of like having a spouse that you can love or a partner that you can love, having a community where you're not just sacrificing yourself to all the time. Like we're told that these things are things we need to give ourselves up for. So how can we reconcile the idea, I guess, of relationships and see how those fit into an egoist moral framework?
Well, it's really quite the opposite. I mean, I'd say the greatest evil of Christianity is that it's anti-love. That is any ideology that tells you to love everybody. It's not possible and it's morally corrupt. To love is to value, and to value is to give affection, time, energy. Like you can't do that for everybody, and it'd be monstrous to do it for everybody. And Ayn Rand made this point that I always really found powerful. Like, imagine you have a romantic partner who says, "Oh, I get no selfish joy from you. I'm here because you need me." Like, nobody would want that. Like, love is profoundly selfish. It's you matter to me. Like, you are profoundly valuable to me and vital to my happiness. And so from the perspective of egoism, love, including romantic love, but not limited to romantic love, friendships, trading relationships with colleagues and so on, all of these are real values, profound values, and deeply selfish values. Now, a relationship with my grocer is a kind of light, almost transactional value. It's a little less than transactional because we see each other regularly. I live in a small town, so we kind of know each other. But for friendships, even colleagues in many respects, and certainly for romantic love, there is a value for value trade involved, but it's spiritual. That is, like, I'm not with my fiance because, like, well, I'll mow the lawn for her and then she'll cook me dinner. It's not that kind of trade. It's the joy I get from her existence and from being able to share and build a life with her together. And it's the same with a friend. It's that the trade is that I have somebody who I admire, respect, and who's able to return and express the same to me. And it's that kind of spiritual trade. And notice that has to be earned. That for me to respect and admire somebody, they have to have achieved something in their character and the kind of person that they are. And that it requires a certain investment in the relationship. It requires work. What it doesn't require is sacrifices. That is the idea that, like, my friend would come hang out with me when no, I'd rather actually be at the baseball game right now. I don't want that. Like, that's sickening and gross. And anybody who did want other people's sacrifices, like, that is disturbing. That is not something to be celebrated and heralded. And the real foundation for relationships, for positive relationships, isn't sacrifice, which just breeds mutual resentment, neediness, and all kinds of codependence, like, name every way the relationship goes wrong. It's really self-esteem and joy. That is, the more joy and self-confidence and self-worth you bring into a relationship, the healthier it's going to be, including navigating, the ups and downs with people. I mean, what do psychologists teach you about a healthy relationship, right? It's that you don't want to be aggressive and you don't want to be, I forget what the negative version of it is, but like basically let people walk all over you. It's to be assertive. It's to be able to say, hey, these are my needs. These are my boundaries. To be able to give constructive feedback. All of that comes from self-esteem. And that's exactly what egoism teaches you to build. And so the only people fit for human relationships, in my view, and the only people who have any clue about how to love are precisely people who are on a quest for their own happiness.
So well said. So well said. What would you say to somebody then who's struggling with self-esteem and feels they have little choice over the life they live? Like, how do you begin to encourage that person to push forwards and to begin to take control, I guess?
I mean, there's three things that are, I think that you have to think about with self-esteem. So one is that, like, do I have the right standards for self-esteem? So self-esteem is an evaluation of the self. And if we have altruistic standards that say I'm good if I sacrifice, then like we're not going to be able to have self-esteem. We should jettison those standards. But it's not only altruism. People can have, I'm good if I'm smarter than other people, or I'm more beautiful than other people. And those are all wrong standards. And what philosophy gives you is the right standards that fundamentally what builds self-esteem is, am I rational? That is, do I use my mind in my fullest capability? Do I pursue what's good as I understand it to the best of my capability? So it's like, what are my standards? Do I live up to them? And if you're not living up to them, the first step is, well, live up to them and work on living up to them. And then the third is, there can be more complicated psychological reasons that aren't really rooted, at least not directly or solely, in like philosophic issues. And some of that may be physiological. Some of it can be, deep-seated trauma. There's a lot of things. And there, like, your action item is go find a good therapist. It's not something that, like, a philosopher can give you a lot of guidance on, but like, those are the three things that you really like. That's your checklist to go through.
That's really helpful. I'm sure that will give somebody a good starter for 10. So, Don, other than obviously kind of reading Effective Egoism, where else can people follow you online and keep up to date with your work? Like, where would you want to point people to carry on after this conversation?
I mean, the best place for all my stuff is on Twitter at Don's Writing on Twitter. And then I have a Substack where I write about a lot of these issues less regularly nowadays than I'd like it to be. But that's at Earthly Idealism. So those are the two major places. But Twitter is really the go-to to stay up to date with what I'm working on.
Amazing. Well, I'll make sure there's links to all of that in the description. So listener, viewer, check those out. And Don, thank you for this book. It's been inspiring. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
I've enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed it and are on YouTube or Rumble, please like, subscribe, and then hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a new episode. And don't forget to check out our community over on Locals. Cheers.